Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Level Up Your Playing with Mr. Goff. And today I'm here with a very special guest. He is a saxophonist extraordinaire, a music educator in the Houston area, and Mr. Goff's former roommate, Mr. Cyrus Morris. So it's great to have you, Cyrus.
Good to be here, man. It's been a long time.
It has been a while. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do, and uh, just in the music world in Houston?
Sure. I'm a musician, as Mr. Goff told you guys, and also I'm an educator here in Houston area. I'm teaching the public school system, so just like Mr. Goff, so I teach band year round, and I'm also a musician, and I do a lot of big band work, jazz band work, a lot of church gospel work, just a lot of gigging um, um, in in the Houston area. Uh, yeah, so that's a little bit about myself.
That's awesome. Yeah, and Cyrus is a pretty modest guy, and he wouldn't tell you this, but I can tell you from personal experience. Amazing musician, really good player. He just told me his saxophone's in the shop, or I'd have him play something for you guys. But I mean, if you got a spare around, um, and you feel
I
like it,
unfortunately do not have a spare, but I mean, I would play flute for your students, but I think I'll save them the trouble. So inside joke, kids.
yeah, we're trying to inspire them. Yeah, not scare them away from. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I feel like all of us kind of have those blind spot instruments. Like the kids all know that like you do not want to hear Mr. Goff play trumpet, and everybody's got one. And yeah, we couldn't. I don't even think we could get Cyrus to blow across a Coke bottle and make a sound back in the
No.
day. Oh man, good times. Okay, so I got a couple questions for you, and so we'll start with this one. Tell us a little bit about what first got you into music.
Um, for me, music has always kind of been in my household, as most of us. My father was one to have a lot of different types of music playing around the house, specifically gospel music, and kind of old 1970s, early 80s R&B. So there was a lot of um, like Aretha Franklin, a lot of Michael Jackson, a lot of Ray Charles, but also a lot of Grover Washington Jr., who's a saxophonist, a lot of Wayne Shorter, a lot of Wilton Felder is also a saxophonist. So there was just a plethora of just different styles of music that was playing in my home. So that really kind of at an early age, I got to hear a lot of different types of music. And then my father is also a preacher, so um, being at the church, not just on Sundays, pretty much every day, you hear a lot of music going on, especially on Sundays. You hear a lot of music. So I will sit in at choir rehearsals when they will have that because I'll be there anyway. The church band rehearsals, and so at a very early age, I was saturated with all this music. I kind of just blossomed into pursuing it.
That's awesome. Yeah. So would you say that there's a specific person or a moment where you kind of knew like I want to be a saxophone player or I want to be a professional musician?
Sure. So as most kids, when they grow up, you kind of tilt towards music that kind of sound similar to what you're hearing on the radio. For me, actually, I've always wanted to be a singer, but I cannot sing. So growing up, my favorite singers were like Aretha Franklin and Whitney Houston. But I probably say the two saxophone players that really caught my ear at a young age was first was Dave Koz, who's a smooth jazz saxophonist, and Kirk Whalum. I think those two were the ones that I kind of heard that caught my ear because the way they approached the saxophone was that similar to that of a human voice. The way they played was very melodic, compared to a lot of the fast playing, a lot of the old school traditional jazz stuff that I love, that I got into as I got older. But initially, my entryway was Kirk Whalum and Dave Cost for sure. Two folks that I've had the pleasure of meeting, which is cool, and I got to share the stage with Kirk a couple of times, which is awesome as well.
That's really cool. Yeah. Okay. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but how would you describe the music that you typically create?
Sure. Probably more, it does tilt towards more contemporary, more so. It's kind of get into a little bit of the business side of it. Usually, as a musician, um, more opportunities as a musician does tilt towards playing things that are more contemporary, more in the pop genre. So I find myself really tilting towards that way. Um, so probably a lot more kind of pop music, smooth jazz, gospel. I get a lot of calls to play that type of music, and also it as a musician, it depends on your style of playing, how you play. Not every musician fits a specific setting, so luckily, when those type of gigs are being sought out, they usually contact me for those gigs. So probably smooth jazz, contemporary. Though I do play, like I said before in the outset, traditional jazz as well, playing a lot of big band stuff. But I do find myself in more smooth jazz, gospel, contemporary settings, and my playing kind of tilts that way.
Gotcha. Cool. So describe your creative process. So like maybe even just your daily routine as a musician. What does that kind of look like?
Sure. In terms of practicing or just my creative, like if I'm trying to write or arrange music?
Both. Yeah.
Both?
Either
Okay.
or and yeah.
Sure. In terms of my creativity, usually for me it comes early in the morning. When I mean early, it's like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Sometimes I'll hear something in my head and I'll come to my piano and kind of play it or record it in my phone. For me, I don't have quite a routine when it comes to creativity to kind of hit you when it does. I do have seasons where um, I tend to not be very creative. And then there's seasons where creativity just kind of hits me in the face. So I think most artists kind of feel that way. In terms of my practice routine, I tend to be very disciplined with that. I'm a big believer in not how, it's not about how long you practice, it's how you practice. So I try to do as much as I can in the least amount of time because I tend to be busy doing other stuff. So, as a saxophonist, that's long tones, pretty much all the fundamental stuff, long tones, um, scales, variations of different scales. I'm a big believer in not playing a scale from, like if it's a G major scale, G to G. I feel the scale is the entire range of the instrument. Um, so I do a lot of that. And I practice a lot of literature. I still practice classical etudes, the ones that me and Mr. Goff did in college. I revisit those from time to time. I do a lot of jazz transcriptions. Do a lot of just learning jazz etudes, just a whole bunch of different things that kind of um, keep me fresh and keep me kind of grounded, especially in the fundamentals. I mentioned Kirk Whalum before. I was privileged to take a lesson with Kirk, and one thing he used to always say to me, he had an acronym ASTWO, and that stands for always something to work on. No matter how good you get, even if you master one thing or one exercise, you can always be creative with the exercise and make it a little harder on yourself. And that tends to be how how at least how I develop. Right, take a little something, tweak it, make it harder. You master it, make it a little harder. Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you said about the idea of like working so much on fundamentals, and I think a lot of people would think that the more advanced you get as a musician, the less you get to have to work on those things. But yeah, it's really true that like you continue to work on those things and master them and improve them the further you go, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure, man. I think it's not necessarily the cool thing to do to practice fundamentals. I mean, we all want to kind of pick up the horn and start doodling and playing cool licks and stuff we know. I mean, no one wants to sit there or listen to you, or you want to listen to yourself playing one note for 2 or 3 minutes. But playing those scales, practicing those fundamentals, they free you up as a musician to be able to play phrases, play melodies and ideas, and be creative um, with those melodies and ideas that you're hearing in your head. In my opinion, the worst feeling as a musician is you're hearing something in your head, but you can't articulate it because you don't have the skill set developed yet to really put that through the instrument. And so for me, I kind of view it that way, fundamentals as a way of freeing you up in order to really be able to communicate what you want to communicate. It's kind of like um, you know trying to give a speech, or trying to tell a story. If you only have a limited vocabulary, or if you're not doesn't if you don't have a great foundation in the English language, I mean, telling that story or communicate something can be very, very difficult and frustrating. You know what you want to say, but you just don't have the tools to say it. Music's the exact same way. So I feel like if you phrase it from that particular perspective, at least that's what I did, and it helped me kind of really focus more so on my fundamentals.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really good advice. So you've mentioned some of the people that you've collaborated with. If you could collaborate with anyone in the entire world, who would be your like dream person to collaborate with?
Musician or singer or
Um,
instrumentalist?
any of the above,
Man, that's a tough question.
and time is no constraint. So past, present, future, anyone.
Okay, probably. So I have several people on my list. In terms of just watching how they work and create, I would love to go back in time and sit and watch Beethoven work and how he orchestrated his stuff. I feel like that would be kind of cool. Stephen Sondheim, I would love to kind of pick his brain. He's still alive, and kind of see how he creates and stuff. And what I'm saying is not just limited to my own kind of microcosm of jazz, which is talking about artists and music in general. In terms of saxophonists, um, probably Sonny Stitt. I've been in a kind of big Sonny Stitt phase for about the last few months. So Sonny Stitt, I would love to collaborate with him for sure. In terms of saxophonists, um, probably Grover Washington Jr. would be another one. Sonny Stitt's a saxophone player as well. So Sonny Stitt and Grover Washington, I think, would be kind of cool. For singers, Whitney would be cool. If I got a chance to play with Whitney. Um, um, Billie Holiday would be cool to sit in with Billie. Uh, Ella Fitzgerald, just because the way she approaches, the way her singing style is pretty much that of an instrumentalist. She sings and articulates as if she's playing an instrument from that kind of Al Jarreau type school. Um, yeah, probably those, man. I mean, there's many more. I can go on for hours, but those
Yeah.
are the ones that kind of come to mind.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I thought it was interesting too, and you kind of touched on it a little bit about how you were mentioning like people from classical music and from musical
Hmm.
theater to
Hmm.
even though you're a jazz musician, like do you still really feel like you draw inspiration from sources outside of jazz?
Oh yeah, for sure, man. Jazz, though its foundation is in like a certain aspect of American culture, it takes stuff from so many different things. There is no jazz without classical music, right? A lot of the stuff you hear Charlie Parker play, there's is rooted in classical studies, classical etudes. He's just tweaking it a little bit. And yeah, so I mean, they feed off each other for sure. Even in the pop world, singers like Donny Hathaway, who really is a fan of people like Debussy. Um, yeah, people like Michael Jackson, who was very influenced by the Nutcracker Suite and all this type of stuff. So all these different artists from all these different genres tend to listen to what's going on in other aspects of the music world, and they're inspired. I'm inspired too by all these different types of music for sure. Sure, like I said before, they kind of feed off each other. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, okay, if you could give one message to a group of young performers, what would that be?
One message. Um, let's see. If I get one. Have a vision of where you want to go musically. I feel like a lot of young musicians don't really have an idea of what they're looking out, what they're trying to get out of the instrument or being a musician. For example, like I teach private lesson students, and most of the students will say, "Well, I want to um, be a good saxophonist." Okay, that's good. Now let's
Right.
break that down. What do you mean by I want to be a good saxophonist? I want to be a good saxophonist. Okay, so who are your favorite saxophone players? Who you like to listen to? I don't know. How do you, if you want to be a good saxophone player, don't you think it's important to listen to some good saxophone players? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's this one guy on the radio.
Right.
So you have to kind of know what you're looking for. You know, you can't. I use the analogy. It's kind of like when you're playing darts, right? You can't have a blindfold on, and you can't just be trying to hit it, you know, either which way. You got to know exactly what you're aiming for. So for me, for example, when I was 12 years old, I knew exactly, like I mentioned, Dave Calls and Kirk Whalum. So by the time I was 12, I already knew in my mind what a good saxophone player would sound like. So I already had this kind of pathway, this kind of that bullseye. I knew what it was. So I wasn't looking for like, oh, I don't know what a good saxophone player sounds like. So I would say, you know, really focus on what you want to be as a musician. In terms of if you want to be good at a specific instrument, find people who are professionals at that instrument who exude the excellence at that particular instrument. Listen to as many folks, and then have that concept in your head and strive for that. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And this is another thing I loved about talking with you, Cyrus, is that like I learn things from time to time too. And so in some of my earlier videos, we've talked a lot about, it's important to set goals for individual practice times.
Mhm,
And I like that idea of also having that overarching goal
mhm,
and it not being a short term one. Cause I've got students, that I teach lessons to who their goal may just be to make all state. And it's like,
mhm.
well, what happens after that? Like, do you see a future forward from Allstate, or is it just that's the end? You've arrived, and you're not going to grow anymore. And
Yeah, you have to think of it. I mean, it's cliche to say, you know, music is about the journey and not the destination, but it's actually it's true because you you set goals for yourself, and when you reach those goals, there's still levels that you haven't tapped into yet. And I mean, you can, let's say you can, you know, like you said, I want to make all state. Okay, so you make all state. Does that necessarily mean you're you're a phenomenal musician? or are you just phenomenal in that small context in terms of that particular piece? What about your fundamentals? What about all this other stuff that makes up what a great musician is? So yeah, for sure, man. Um, you have to think broad, but also, like you said, you have to think of the things that you can control day to day that can lead you to, um, well, what you want to be. I was watching a documentary on YouTube with Will Smith, and he used to say that his father um, bought a building, a warehouse, and the roof caved in. And he said that his father wanted him and his brother to rebuild that wall. It wasn't a roof, it was a wall, and they didn't think they can do it. Oh, this is going to be too hard. We can't do it. And his dad said, all we got to do is all you guys got to do is lay a brick as perfectly as a brick can be laid. Work on that one brick day by day, and sooner or later, you'll have a wall. It took them 9 months, but after 9 months, they had a perfectly good wall. Music's the same way. Control, have a the big goal for in Will's case was we want to rebuild this wall. The microcosm, the small goals, is laying a brick day by day. Music's the same way. What's your big goal? I want to be good. I want to do that. I want to do this. But the smaller goals, all my scales, better tone, all that type stuff, all state, all that stuff comes into that as well.
That's really sound advice. I love it. Um, okay, so what are some places you've performed, and do you have any upcoming performances?
Sure. In terms of upcoming performances, because of the pandemic, that kind of put a hold on a lot of that stuff. Usually during the summer, forming a lot of recording. Usually during the school year, I don't do as much because I'm so focused on teaching students like you guys. But usually, Christmas, Easter, those traditional things pick up. But during the summer, I used to play. I tend to play a lot. So nothing on the books just yet. We kind of have to see how how things reopen and how the pandemic is. In terms of places I have played, I've played at just different jazz places here in Houston. The Flat, there's that's a jazz place here in Houston. A place called Cezanne. I played Miller Outdoor Theater for a couple times for Jazz Appreciation Week. I've played. They tend to have like Motown performances and all the different performances. I played that. I've subbed for the Houston Symphony before on clarinet, not saxophone, because the symphony doesn't use saxophone. So I get called. I do double on clarinet sometimes. My biggest things in Houston probably the Miller Outdoor, Houston Symphony from time to time, and then places like Cezanne and the Flat. I haven't played at like the International Music Festival in New Orleans. I played that a couple of times with some folks. But what comes to mind tend to be those. Those are the kind of things that kind of stick out in my mind.
And you do a lot of traveling with your playing too. Like you travel all around the Texas, Louisiana circuit, and then beyond that too, right?
Yeah, yeah. I tend to travel quite often. I tend to find myself more so in different areas of Texas, Houston, Dallas, Austin, and then New Orleans. I do find myself occasionally up there in Boston, not often, but usually more so kind of in the southern area, probably Florida too. I've done some work in Florida as well. But yeah, man, more so in the south, but I do kind of venture out kind of in the northern parts as well. But yeah, for sure.
Cool. Um, we've kind of touched on that one already, but so I'll go on to the next one. Let's see. What's the best piece of advice you've been given as a musician?
Best advice. Okay, I think one right after college. I was going through this kind of bebop phase. I was, because in college I tend to be, I really was focused on what were my weaknesses as a player. And at the time, it was language, learning the traditional language. And so I started listening to a lot of bebop. I started playing a lot of stuff. And so a couple months after college, I got a chance to hear Ronnie Laws perform, and then I got to take a lesson with Ronnie Laws. Um, and if you ever, some of you guys, kids may be wondering how this Mr. Morris, how does he keep getting these lessons with all these different folks? Um, it's kind of strange. I would actually sneak up. I wouldn't. Kids do not do this. Sometimes after these performances, I will actually sneak up, like on stage, and grab that artist's case, and then I will bring it down to the artist while he was in the lobby, and I will hand them this case, and they were like, "Why is this kid having my case?" I was like, "Oh, here's your case. I love your playing. Can I have a lesson?" And then they're like, "This kid got a lot of nerve, so you must really really want to." And so so the anywho with Ronnie Laws, um, he did say something to me that kind of hit a nerve, and so I took a lesson with him, and he said, "Well, let me hear you play something." So I was playing. I think at the time I was transcribing on my own some Charlie Parker stuff, and I was trying to impress him playing really really fast. And he stopped me. He said, "Oh, okay, 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 okay." He said, "Wow." He said, "You're playing a lot of notes. You ain't saying nothing."
Wow.
And so that really it hit me, and he said some other stuff, but I give you guys the G-rated version. Um, so it really hit a nerve, and he really was basically saying, um, this, you're learning this language, but you don't learn language just to learn language. You learn language to be able to communicate something. And so I've been on this journey of not only just learning language, and learn language of jazz and the language of music, but try so to learn that language and articulate that language with excellence, but also remember that I'm trying to communicate something to the audience, because music um, is to be heard by other people. It's not just for our own self, you know, it's not just for us, We can't just sit in a practice room playing Down the Lead by Charlie Parker and just, oh my goodness, look at me, I can play Down the Lead,
Right.
right? But it is meant to, you know, to be shared, excuse me, with other people. So I think for that's probably the best advice, and that I've gotten. That kind of stick with me. That every time I think about it, kind of makes me cringe, a little bit. It humbles me for sure.
Right.
Makes me seem this small.
I think it's weird too how that sometimes the harshest things our teachers say to us are the ones that have the most impact. And I don't know that that's a.
Yes,
It's like,
yes.
if you have a teacher who is, we had some pretty great teachers, and like Dr. Taylor's the sweetest lady, super nice and kind. But there were those times where you knew, like, she's disappointed in what I'm doing right now,
Oh,
and,
yes, yes, for
and
sure, man.
it was like
Yeah,
you had insulted your grandma. It was the worst feeling. But
yeah. She would if I couldn't play something, or if sometimes we were working on etudes or something, she knew I didn't play it, and every time I was going to lesson, when I saw that little baggie of the cut up music in it, I was like, oh man, she went down that road.
yeah,
Let's feed you this. That's like your little baby because you're acting like one. For
man.
sure.
So okay, what was your biggest hurdle while becoming a musician, and how did you overcome it?
Sure. Self doubt, um, and I think also not focusing on me as a musician. So what I mean by that is everyone has their own journey in their own lane, and you have to try to figure out what your lane is as a musician, um, and you have to work towards your weaknesses. Um, So we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. You cannot be focused so much on what other people are doing. Oh, so and so can play, so and so can do this, so and so can do that. Focus on what you can control, what you do well. The things you do well, you really work on that because that's your thumbprint, that's your fingerprint. That's what makes you you musically. But you also need to really focus on the things that you struggle with and can't do well. Like for me, for example, I things I do well. I'm a very expressive and melodic player. That I never really have to work on. It's just something that's just me. I naturally can do that. It's not really like I quote unquote practice that. I think it just comes from hearing singers and Dave Calls, Kirk Whalum, and obviously I practice in terms of like fundamentals, and it helped me to get that. But in terms of playing melodically, that came natural for me. What came difficult for me was technique, and so I will practice a lot on technique, so much so that there were months and sometimes years that I wouldn't even really, when I'm practicing, wouldn't play melodically unless I got called for a gig. I'll just be really woodshedding a lot of technical stuff to kind of work with that. So I would say find your lane, be inspired about what other people are doing, but don't get overwhelmed and don't get sidetracked. Don't have a spirit of jealousy or envy to it because they're doing them and you just got to do you. And they're focusing on their development and their journey, and you got to focus on your development in your journey because just like they are in their space and doing well, even though you feel like you can go into their space and you can't maneuver in their space well, the flip side is also true. If they come to your space, most likely they can't do what you do well. So we all have those things that we need to work on to improve at, but also the things that we do well to kind of help create our own musical thumbprint.
For sure, yeah. Well, and that's something I really appreciated about the time that we were in school together and that kind of thing is like each one of us kind of had our strong areas, and we had played together enough that we kind of knew that and could learn
Yeah,
from
for
each other
sure.
on it. And so like you said, you're a very lyrical player. You have a really melodic style. And there were others in our section, and myself included, honestly, from the start, where I'm a very technical player and very mechanical. And for some of us, that comes a whole lot more naturally than the melodic stuff. Who's the better musician? Well, that's not. They're two. It's apples and oranges, right? and
Yeah, for
and
sure.
we can learn from each other and help each other develop in the areas where we're weak, and get better together. And even with the music community, there's a lot of people. Well, I don't know. There's this image kind of painted about that it's all competition,
Yeah.
and part of it is, the media and shows where it's literally competitive music making.
Hmm.
And while there is a lot of competition, I think there's also a lot of cooperation that happens. Like, most musicians are willing to share what they know and help you get better.
Yes, for sure. The best musicians, the one who are at the top of their game, tend to be the ones that are the most gracious in terms of sharing the knowledge, the things that they have learned. I have been around a lot of musicians, as you guys know, and there have been those who have been not gracious, have been very arrogant, don't feel like they want to share because they're in this stage of anxiety. They're always looking behind them. Who's going to catch up to me? Who's going to steal my gig? Who's going to outshine me? Um, but it's not about that being outshined, right? Everyone can shine together in their own in their own way. And yeah, the great musicians from Kirk to Dave to Ronnie Laws tend to be the most gracious with their time and knowledge because you can only hang on to it for so long. You have a limited time on this earth. As I like to say, that journey from your mama's womb to tomb is short, even though it may not seem like it at times. Um, I'm in my 30s now, and I think about it in 10 years. I'm pretty much got one foot in
Right.
in the grave. I got more time behind me pretty much in front. So time goes by fast. So it's all about sharing knowledge, and music has always been that way. Every generation, though they do add to what had come before, but every generation is responsible for passing on traditions and knowledge to the next generation, kind of like passing the baton, because it's not yours. It's not yours.
Right. So, what would you say is the most stressful, challenging, exhausting part of your music career?
Hmm. There's probably the most is there is a degree if I'm lucky because I teach in the public school system. So when you teach in the public school system, like a regular job, there is a degree of peace um, and relaxation with that because there's a degree of stability as like some of you guys parents when they go to work that they get a check that they will have every 2 weeks. So when you're a school teacher, just like anything else, like a regular job, you're guaranteed that. So there's some piece of that. But you went as a gigging musician, that can be challenging sometimes as well because things fall through. Sometimes you play a gig and maybe you're not exactly what they're looking for, and so they choose someone else. Or like during the pandemic, things get canceled. Um, so that can be very frustrating, and in terms of my the gigging part of what I do for sure. So just to say, guys, if you see any local artists around town, make sure you I would say shake their hand, but I can't say that because of Corona. Just kind of give them a head. No, and say we appreciate you because I promise you they're going through a lot if that's all they do to make a living for themselves. Yeah, so probably that for sure. The gigging aspect of what I do can be very frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, and I think we kind of already answered this one too. But as far as your day to day schedule as a performing musician, what does that kind of look like for you?
Sure. It depends on the gig. Um, I tend to be a very disciplined person anyway, so I tend to work better in the morning. I'm not really a late night person. I mean, I tend to have to be, if I'm playing gigs or stuff, but I tend to be in the bed pretty early, and I tend to get up around 5:30, 6 a.m. every morning. I've been doing that for years, and I tend to go to the gym, run, kind of clear my mind, read, meditate, that type stuff. Um, to really kind of synergize myself, um, when it comes to the music part of what I do. Um, I think I forgot the question. What was it?
You're good. You're talking about waking up at 6 a.m. and I'm looking at the phone going, it's almost
Yes.
11. It is past Mr. Morris's
No,
bedtime.
it is fine.
Um, yeah.
I'm
So
getting old. Forgot what you.
day to day schedule, just so
Yes.
as a performing
Yeah,
musician.
so sure, as a performing musician, like I said, it depends on the gig. I kind of set my schedule around different rehearsals. So if I'm doing a jazz ensemble gig, they'll send me charts and they'll send me rehearsals, so I tend to schedule my day around that. It kind of depends on each gig, in terms of how my schedule day to day, um, excuse me, tend to be. In terms of practicing, what I try to do is, Dr. Taylor told me, she probably told you too, you want to schedule your practicing like it's a class. So you guys who are in, if you have, periods in your class, right, first period is this class or second period is that class from 8 to this is this. So it really helps you to have kind of a set time that you really want to focus on, your playing. But in terms of the performance stuff, like I said, man, it kind of just depends on the gig.
Yeah, I can kind of like I 2 years ago, I guess I played a musical, a pit orchestra for a musical, and it was like one of the hardest books I've ever had to play something like that. And I remember at that time it was kind of like I had about 3 weeks with the music, and so I spent like sometimes 2 and 3 hours a day just
Hmm.
working that music for about a month, and then after it was done, like I moved on to something else, and I was back in my normal practice routine. So I can
Yeah,
relate.
those musicals are hard, man. I had a friend that he plays the saxophone. He was touring with the Broadway play The Color Purple a few years ago, and he came in Houston, and he got sick. He didn't know if he was going to be able to do the gig, and he talked to his higher ups and said, "Hey, man, there's this Houston musician, Cyrus is pretty good. I know him. You probably have to give him the sub for me." So he called me like um, literally probably like early that afternoon, and the gig was the next day that night. Like, "Hey, man, I'm getting sick. I don't know if I can do it." And he sent me the music. I looked at that music, man. I said, luckily he was well enough to play it, and I was fine with that.
Right.
I was like, ooh, I'm glad that's some hard. It was some hard music. Yeah, that music it can be difficult for sure.
It's crazy. Well, and then the switching instruments and everything else in the middle of it. It's
Yeah, yeah, for
and
sure.
some of those key signatures. Oh my goodness.
Hmm.
Okay. So how do you get over mental blocks and push through like those really long, hard days?
Sure. Um, Mental blocks. I feel like they're just inevitable. I mean, in terms of um, getting over them, I don't know if you can really get over them, but kind of work through them. I think just having a set routine, man. Those hard days, having those small goals, like you said, staying strong on your fundamentals and stuff. So if it's a hard day and I'm feeling like I can't, I feel like I haven't really, done anything productive. Um, I may take out an etude and like, or something I said I was gonna, have something learned by the end of the week or end of the month. And if I can just get a little bit of that learned, then I know at least, even though on my worst day, I've made some type of progress. Um, so I think just having a set routine, clear, small goals that you're kind of, you know, that you can really see small progress that you can actually log, into your journal or check off that you've done. I think that really helps. Because even on your worst day, oh, if you feel like I haven't done anything, well, technically I did work through this and this is better, even though maybe some other aspects of my playing kind of was suffering that day. At least I've made some type of progress in this particular area.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really good. So this is another student question, and my last
Hmm.
question. So, did music ever get boring for you? And if so, how do you continue to be inspired, motivated, and love music?
Um, when you're young, and especially in middle school and high school, you feel like you're in two worlds. There's the music that your band director and your teachers are teaching you to play. That's one that's one music world. And then there's the other stuff that you like and you listen to on the radio. And you don't feel like they connect at all. Right? You feel like this is this world over here and that's that word over there. And how is this gonna help, you know, help the other aspect of what I do. And so when I was younger, you know, that feeling of will this help me in all these different other areas tend to kind of halt my drive, my determination. But once you start um, listening to enough music of all these different genres, of all these different eras, you hear subtle things, even in pop music, that are little like motifs, little motives, all these different things that you hear that they're sampling from all these other stuff that came from the past. I mean, you remember that? What is that video we used to listen to back the walk back in college? The lick. Remember that?
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. So it's that little thing that lick was in all these different types of music, and for me, that was kind of the catalyst to kind of re motivate me. Like, oh, okay, even all this stuff I'm, playing in school, even though it's classical, it may not be what I'm hearing on the radio. Maybe I'm listening to it with my friends. There's little things in here that I can relate and kind of find some ways to make it interesting. Also, too, I'll say, don't just limit and your practicing to the, your band stuff. I think that's part of it too. Most students don't venture out into their practicing. They'll just practice their UIL music, their all-state music, and so it gets very dull and very boring really fast. But for me, I was doing, in high school, I'll practice my band music, I'll practice my marching band music, all this other type stuff. But at the same time, I was practicing jazz. I was trying to listen for practicing jazz stuff I like. I will buy, pop tune books. I will play through all that stuff. So I had enough stuff to kind of keep me energized, not just playing one type of music. So I would say to your students for sure, you guys just venture off into playing different types of music. Don't just focus on your band stuff. That's important, and you need to focus on that. But find something you like. If you like a country song or a hip hop song, get on your horn or whatever and try to learn some stuff to it. That keeps you kind of energized as well. So you need to spend some time also having fun, um, with your instrument and make music as well. It has to be kind of this dual relationship in terms of um, practicing and playing different things.
Yeah, I like something that Dr. Hamilton, one of our other professors, used to say. Is he's like, you need to, like, it's called playing music. It needs, and so at some point it's got to be fun. And so there is that aspect of
Hmm.
like, sometimes you need to work music and sometimes you need to play music, and
Hmm.
being able to balance those two things.
Yeah, I mean, as artists, as musicians, it's hard because Quincy Jones once said, in a quote, he said, music for the audience, music is 100% magic. It's just a magical experience. But for artists who are making the music, it's 99% work, 1% magic. In terms of, because you're really, when you're in it, you're seeing like, oh my goodness, it's not fun. It just seems like we're just working. But when you get to a point where you're really practicing, you're really in the zone, and you learn a piece of music, you know, you can really, and it's very freeing when you're playing it as an ensemble. You probably have, your students, when everyone knows the music, you're just, when you're playing it together, it's freeing, right? You're playing music. You're not focusing on who's out of tune, who's doing this, who's doing that. I mean, there's a place for that. The feeling of just playing music and when everyone's kind of in that zone, know their parts. I mean, it's more freeing and more enjoyable than being in a setting where half the people know their parts, right? Because it's not really playing. You really have to focus on work. The more you focus on the work aspect of it, the more fun and freeing playing will be, and the more impact you'll have on the audience, right? Because everyone can feel, as an audience member, they can feel when something's not quite right, right? It's kind of like our heartbeat, right? It's a steady pulse. If it varies, then we know something. Then we know something. We have a problem. Something's up. Same thing with music, man. If everyone's in the zone, you know, in the pocket, as in terms of jazz, language, everyone feels that. The audience can feel that. And the audience, if something's not quite right, I mean, that's that you feel that uncertainty, you feel that anxiety, and the audience can feel that as well. They may not necessarily they probably can describe it the way we do in musical terms, but they can feel that something's off. So the more you really focus on the work, um, in practicing, at home, in band, that leads you to when it comes to the performance to just play, right? As Charlie Parker used to say, you learn the rules and forget them, right?
Mhm.
Learn the music and then it just frees you to just play because you already know it's in your subconscious because you worked on it so much. You can just have fun and enjoy and be in the moment.
Yeah, great advice, man. Um, well, anything else final words of wisdom that you have for us?
Um, yeah, just students just keep pressing on. Make sure that you have a clear idea of, if you're really focused on and you love music, really have a clear idea. Take the time, get a little notebook, and write down. If you want to be a great musician, and start to really do the work of dissecting what that means. Look up great artists on your particular instrument. Look up different styles of music played on a specific instrument. Um, yeah, so just you have to just really kind of sit down and think about how good you want to be. Um, you know, um, and it doesn't have to be me and Mr. Golf. We're doing this for a living. For me, I knew I wanted to do music and be an educator by I was 12, so my path was already set. So I already knew exactly what I wanted to do. But for most folks, maybe they just want to be, um, you know, doing something else, just play on the side. I give you one quick example. When I got out of college, there's a band here called Thunder Soul. It's part of the Conrad Johnson Foundation. Um, and then when I got hired for that gig, I have to admit, for me, I was a little cocky. I just got out of college, I got my little music degree. I went to school and been practicing for 5 years. It took me 5 years to graduate, kids. Um, and then, I got in, went to the rehearsal. They gave me the music, and it was I ever played, and I was the worst musician there. And everyone else, at least in the saxophone section, they didn't have a music degree. Some were janitors, some were teachers in other, in other fields. Some were bank tellers. Some people were working at grocery stores. But they're just folks who, you know, though they wanted to do other things in terms of their career, they just loved to play and they wanted to be good at it, right? And here I am with the music degree, thinking I'm, all that in a bag of chips, and I'm the worst one to play. So much so, they were they went down the line. Everyone's taking the solo. When they got to me, I was like, I'm not taking the solo. I'm not following these cats. you know, and I'm the one who's supposed to have the degree. So it's not about having this necessary degree. If you want to be good at an instrument, good at something, even if that you don't want that to be your profession, if you want to just, to keep practicing and developing, that's definitely in your reach. You don't need a piece of paper to say, that you're good. You just need the time and the drive to make that happen.
Yeah, great advice. And thank you so much again, Cyrus, Mr. Morris. I don't know what to call you with kids, but Cyrus
That's fine,
Morris.
man. Cyrus is fine. It makes me feel younger.
Yeah. Hey, we need all the help we can get at that, right? Uh, but yeah, thanks again. And we appreciate your wisdom and your time. And best wishes in the rest of Corona season.
Yeah, for sure. Take
All right.
care, guys. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.